Welcome, fellow Dexter theorists. Today we dare to ask, what if Masuka found out Dexter was the Bay Harbor Butcher? It all began with a single photograph that nobody at Miami Metro ever expected Vince Masuka to uncover, let alone interpret. While rummaging through archival evidence from the Bay Harbor Butcher case, he stumbled upon a blurry image of a figure hauling what looked like black garbage bags to a sleek boat. The timestamp placed it months after James Stokes had been labeled the Butcher and died in that mysterious cabin explosion. Masuka felt his pulse thrum. It was a tiny detail, barely legible on the photo's corner, that hinted the vessel in question matched the shape and color of Dexter Morgan's slice of life. In that moment, the comedic forensic genius realized the entire department might have pinned the worst crimes in its history on the wrong man. This discovery was not the first time Masuka had encountered anomalies pointing towards Dexter, but it was the first undeniable piece of physical evidence he couldn't rationalize away. For years, he had joked about Dexter's fascination with blood, chalking it up to an eccentric personality. When the Bay Harbor Butcher atrocities came to light, Masuka had taken the lead in analyzing those dismembered body parts retrieved from the ocean. He'd marveled at the surgical precision, had even said it reminded him of someone with an almost scientific approach to killing. At the time, he shrugged it off as speculation, but that memory rushed back now, coupling with the newly found photograph, forming a puzzle that spelled out a shocking truth. Dexter Morgan might still be hunting criminals under the Bay Harbor Butcher moniker. In the days that followed, Masuka wandered the corridors of Miami Metro, feigning his usual banter about nightclubs, questionable humor, and the latest online dating mishaps. Colleagues found him entertaining, and no one sensed any shift in his demeanor, except, perhaps, Dexter. Across the lab, Dexter's curious gaze tracked Masuka's changed rhythms. After all, Dexter had always possessed an uncanny ability to spot tension beneath cheerful surfaces. Unbeknownst to him, Masuka was reeling from an internal storm that kept him awake at night. He asked himself if it could really be possible that his co-worker, an affable father and blood spatter expert, was also the same methodical butcher who once terrorized the city. Masuka tried to recall every telling moment he had ever witnessed. There were Dexter's impossibly timely insights during homicide investigations, his calm and borderline detached reaction to brutal crime scenes, and the way he always seemed relieved to leave the office at odd hours. Masuka had joked so often about Dexter being obsessed with blood that he lost count. Now those jokes felt ominous, no longer amusing. He was a man whose entire career revolved around noticing patterns that others missed. That skill had propelled him into the lead forensic analyst job, so how could he have missed the biggest secret right under his nose? The first surprise arrived one morning when Dexter Morgan brought in fresh evidence from a newly discovered body that washed ashore, wrapped meticulously in plastic. Masuka, assigned to the case, observed that the cuts on the victim's torso showed a level of care rarely seen in typical homicides. It reminded him of the old Bay Harbor Butcher patterns, controlled violence with an undercurrent of vengeance. He felt a chill ripple down his spine as he realized how perfectly those slices mirrored the dismemberments from years ago. Quietly, he cross-referenced the old forensics he once helped gather. Indeed, the angles, the depth, and the method were practically identical. He was about to mention it to Deb, but paused, deciding at the last second to keep it under wraps. He suspected Dexter would test the lab results, so he introduced a minor accidental spill on the old slides, delaying the final match confirmation. Humor gave Masuka a lifeline in those tense moments. He found himself spouting half-baked jokes and borderline inappropriate quips with heightened insensitivity, hoping nobody would detect the dread beneath. Others rolled their eyes or called him a pervert as usual. Inside, he was a roiling knot of curiosity and dread, unable to decide if confronting Dexter was the right path. After all, if Dexter truly was the Bay Harbor Butcher, he was also lethal. Masuka replayed a memory of what happened to Sergeant Dokes, who doggedly pursued Dexter and ended up dead under suspicious circumstances in that cabin explosion. No official link was proven, but everyone at Miami Metro privately speculated. Masuka didn't want to join that list of cautionary tales. The second surprise arrived in the form of a cryptic conversation with Angel Batista. One afternoon, Batista complained that Dexter had once again stepped away from the station at a critical moment. Batista offhandedly joked that Dexter could be dealing with extracurricular activities, then laughed it off, calling Dexter a family man who had improved after fatherhood. The mention of fatherhood reminded Masuka how Dexter managed to juggle both his baby's needs and these complicated investigations. Could a normal father truly manage that unless he had superhuman organization skills? Or an insatiable drive that overshadowed routine moral boundaries? The thought gave Masuka a jolt of dark realization. He decided then to covertly gather more data, searching logs of Dexter's lab requests, cross-referencing them with unsolved crimes that ended abruptly. He discovered a bizarre pattern. Every time a suspect slipped through the cracks, Dexter seemed to run specialized blood tests that night or the following day. Of course, the department's official stance was that these were random tasks, yet the suspect in question would often vanish soon after. Masuka correlated these timeframes, noticing how in multiple instances, no bodies were found, but a probable homicide scene was identified, often with suspiciously incomplete evidence. That pattern gave Masuka the final push to suspect Dexter was the city's hidden vigilante, removing those criminals from the street. At once, he felt equal parts horror and grudging admiration. After all, how many times had he lamented the legal system's failure to put predators away? A swirl of humor threatened to break him during a late-night session in the lab. He found himself ironically analyzing blood spatters from a bar fight, giggling to himself that even drunk brawlers left better trace evidence than the city's stealthiest butcher. This was the moment Dex showed up behind him, quiet as a ghost. Masuka nearly jumped out of his chair, catching a glimpse of Dexter's inquisitive expression. He forced out a cheap one-liner about the bar fight's participants lacking artistic style in their violence. Dexter blinked, as though uncertain whether to laugh. Masuka's heart hammered, convinced that Dexter sensed the shift in his attitude. Yet Dexter merely nodded and left, though the tension in that exchange lingered in the lab's fluorescent glare. Before we move on, I'd like to ask you for a small favor. If you like this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. Imagine what we could accomplish if everyone subscribed. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So, is it done? Great. Thank you so much. People might have expected Masuka to run straight to the authorities with his suspicions. Instead, he weighed the personal cost. He was not Sergeant Dokes, fearless and unwavering in moral convictions, nor was he Deb, fiercely protective but also capable of ignoring suspicious details out of love for her brother. Masuka was the comedic relief at Miami Metro, often shadowed by bigger personalities. He deeply valued his job, the acceptance he'd carved out among colleagues, and the reputation he upheld as the department's best forensic mind. He worried that if he accused Dexter, it would unravel everything. Cases would be questioned, convictions reversed, and the entire homicide division might face national scrutiny. He found fresh footprints near the ocean behind a deserted warehouse, which investigators had flagged for another unrelated homicide. Masuka had been called to examine suspicious splatter patterns, and those footprints matched Dexter's shoe size precisely, right down to an unusual tread. More chillingly, the splatter patterns ended abruptly, as if carefully cleaned. There was a single tiny droplet left behind that matched a person who had escaped prison on a technicality, someone who had vanished a day earlier. That drop of blood was enough for Masuka to confirm Dexter must have struck again. He decided to secure that droplet for private analysis instead of logging it officially. He wanted undeniable proof. Gathering his final puzzle piece, Masuka reanalyzed certain old Bay Harbor Butcher slides from the archives, those that were left intact after Dokes' death. He recalled joking about how disturbingly neat the cuts were. In the back of his mind, he also remembered the sly grin Dexter wore when analyzing those same slides. Hindsight was merciless. The archived slides displayed the identical wave pattern in the splatter that Masuka had recorded at the warehouse. It was conclusive. With a chill, he realized he now held the last straw in his hand. If he went public, everyone would know that Sergeant Dokes had been innocent, and Dexter was the real butcher all along. In a swirl of adrenaline, Masuka decided it was time to expose the truth. Fear pulsed through his veins, yet he felt a moral imperative to act. The city deserved to know it had been worshipping the wrong hero. He printed out his analyses, referencing the correlation between the footprints, the droplets, and the archived wave patterns. Then he packaged them in a sealed envelope, planning to hand them directly to Captain Maria LaGuerta. He even indulged in a moment of dark humor, reflecting that if he survived the day, he might frame the expression on Dexter's face when confronted with the evidence. But Dexter was always a step ahead. In a quiet corridor of the station, as Masuka discreetly left his office, everything went black. He later woke up in a dimly lit interior, dizzy and bound to a sturdy metal chair. Instantly, he recognized the stench of the ocean and the smell of plastic. The place felt like an abandoned dockside storeroom. A single overhead light flickered. His heart pounded when he heard faint footsteps. Dexter appeared, as calm as if he was entering the lab for a routine test. Masuka's mind reeled. He had no direct illusions about what might come next. There was no direct conversation, but Dexter's eyes revealed deep conflict. Masuka watched him circle the chair, rummaging for something among the stacked crates. At intervals, Dexter's expression softened, hinting at a swirl of emotions. Masuka remembered their years of camaraderie, the endless jokes, the times Dexter had shown surprising kindness in small ways, like letting Masuka claim credit for certain breakthroughs. That recollection only increased Masuka's dread. Under normal circumstances, Dexter protected innocence, but was a friend with incriminating evidence still innocent in Dexter's eyes? Instead of an immediate kill, Dexter made sure Masuka was secured, then sat on an overturned crate in front of him. In a tense silence, Dexter's posture suggested regret. Masuka recognized that Dexter was recalling everything they'd shared at Miami Metro. The comedic banter, the times they had confided in each other about petty frustrations, and the unspoken reality that Masuka was among the best forensic minds in the city. Perhaps Dexter didn't want to annihilate that bond so easily. Yet Dexter's code had always been clear. No one endangers his secret. Inside that dockside prison, an odd sense of nostalgia pervaded the moment. Masuka's thoughts leapt back to the earliest days when he teased Dexter for having a blood fetish, never realizing how close he was to the truth. He almost laughed, in spite of the danger. The horrifying comedic irony was that the only reason he was in this predicament was because he had done his job too well. That realization hammered home the risk all sharp-eyed analysts took when they saw more than was safe to see. The darkness that had always lurked around Dexter was now swirling around him, leaving him captive and terrified. Masuka gleaned from Dexter's haunted gaze that there was part of his co-worker, his friend, that felt genuine remorse. Dexter apparently couldn't bring himself to carry out his typical final act. Instead, Dexter paced, as though weighing the possibility that he could trust Masuka to remain silent. After all, they had lived side by side in the station for years, forging a bond in the strangest environment possible. Masuka, in turn, felt an overwhelming mix of sympathy and fear. He knew Dexter's code targeted murderers who escaped justice, but would Dexter violate that code if threatened? Left alone for a time, Masuka's mind raced. He realized that Dexter had discovered the envelope or the digital trail in the station, culminating in a preemptive strike. The comedic forensics expert cursed himself for moving too slowly. If he had gone public sooner, he wouldn't be sitting here, tied up. But that same caution might have spared his life initially, giving him a chance to see the side of Dexter that was not purely monstrous. Now he was in limbo, uncertain whether Dexter would take him out or find another solution. Dexter reappeared, carrying a small kit. Masuka recognized the distinct shape of an injection device, suspecting it was Dexter's typical method for incapacitating future victims. Yet Dexter hesitated. In that electric hush, Dexter conveyed, through a series of measured gestures, that he had reached a decision. He would not kill Masuka. Instead, Masuka would remain hidden, forcibly isolated until Dexter could gauge if he was truly safe to release. In a strangely heartfelt gesture, Dexter stood behind Masuka, reflecting on the complicated web of trust they had once shared. It felt like a lamentation for the friendship they could never return to. Under that solitary light, with salty air drifting through broken windows, Masuka perceived how everything had changed. He was now a living testament to Dexter's greatest secret. The conclusion left a bitter taste, but also a bizarre sense of relief. He had forced Dexter to reveal a flicker of genuine humanity. Masuka was not simply another criminal on the table, and he might yet walk away from this. However, the story ended on a chilling cliffhanger. Dexter left him tethered, ensuring Masuka couldn't scream or escape. The overhead bulb buzzed, leaving him in a flickering gloom. He was uncertain if Dexter intended to come back and end it all, or eventually negotiate some uneasy pact. The final question lingered. Would Dexter let him go with a vow of silence, or would the Bay Harbor Butcher claim one more victim in the name of secrecy? What do you think?